You will soon see that there are fantastical creatures living among us.
Fairies weren't always what they are considered to be now. William Shakespeare had very different views from today's modern outlook concerning fairies and magical beings. Shakespeare looked at fairies during the time in which he lived, at their particular appearances, and their odd characteristics. What he saw greatly affected what society currently sees when they look at the myth of fairies. It was through his work that Shakespeare was able to convey the image of fairies during his time. William Shakespeare was a playwright that lived in 16th century England. His plays were popular and made for the pleasure of the people watching them. With this in mind, he wrote A Midsummer's Night Dream. The major role of fairies in the play reflect the fairies' popularity of that time. England, back in the 16th century, was a place where legend and superstition was still a part of daily life. Myths, fanciful stories and ideas, such as fairies, were popular with most of the people. Even for Shakespeare, common tradition had made them familiar, according to T.F. Dyer, who wrote a book on the folklore of Shakespeare. The village where Shakespeare was said to have lived was known to be near to where fairies resided, giving way to the imagination of the people. It was not only such in the minds of the common peasant people, but everyone alike, including the very obviously inspired Shakespeare. The superstitions and popularity of fairies greatly affected Shakespeare's thoughts about them. The appearance of fairies was always a vague part of Shakespeare's interest in them. The assumed appearance of fairies, the way that they are believed to have looked, was different then from today. When people currently think about fairies, it is often picturing them as tiny people with insect-like wings. Though they were believed to be that way as well before, the more powerful, legendary figures of fairy myth were not portrayed as such. For instance, those greater were imagined to have human attributes and proportions, being realistically sized. Usually they were graceful creatures, perhaps a mix between angels and humans. However, they were also described in the image of playful young children. Sometimes they had wings, mostly they didn't, and perhaps flew by way of magic. Sometimes they shape-shifted by magic, according to other folklore of Shakespeare's time. Like most mythical creatures, they never had a definite appearance. On the other hand, fairies were well known for their characteristics, which Shakespeare included in his usage of their image. Their characteristics, or the way that they often acted, was a large part of the superstition that surrounded them. Fairies were, after all, known to be given to emotion. While some were sweet and kind, others were proud and enamored with themselves. On the rare occasion, fairies could be both. They enjoyed playing around, were fickle and mischievous. A Midsummer's Night Dream is a play largely focused on the way they stick their delicate noses into other people's business. Shakespeare recognized that as far as fairies go, some fairies like to meddle in human affairs. It was always a big joke to them. Whenever someone in Shakespeare's time were to say, misplace a boot, it was easy for them to place the blame on fairies. It was practically the meaning of their existence to cause humans problems. Though they sometimes caused issues that could end up being dangerous, most of the time they didn't mean it. Fairies were well known by the people to be childish creatures. Controlled by impulses and emotions, it showed in the way that the fairies acted. Compared to the fairies' modern image of tiny human or just wings, flying around in their hidden fairylands, causing the seasons and fixing things, Shakespeare's view was very different. He looked at fairies during the time in which he lived, at their particular appearances, and their odd characteristics. The two pictures of these magical creatures are largely connected, though still very different. What Shakespeare shared in his thoughts about fairies has been a large factor in what many children still believe now. His work has substantially affected and inspired other works, such as J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. His views on fairies that he has gleaned from his time, held, and ultimately passed on, have been a priceless gift that has captured the heart and belief of many people.
When a baby laughs for the first time, that's when a fairy is born.